Hello, this is Tony Blazier for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
This is Hannah. This is Bailey. Welcome to the Motocross Vaults!
Hello and welcome to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at the history of Suzuki's iconic RMX250, a machine Suzuki produced, at least here in the US, from 1989 until 1998. After that, it was retired. Now, the US version we got here was based off of the all-new 89 RM250, complete redesign this year, and this was after... Suzuki had a bit of a lull in the mid-'80s there. They came out in the 70s, very strong, great machines. The RMs were awesome, groundbreaking machines. Early 80s, the early full floaters, very successful. But they really kind of took a dive there in the mid-'80s. 86 RMs were not very good in any of the classes, really. Well, at least the 250s and the 125. 80 was a little more competitive. But through that time period, the RMs kind of fell behind a little bit in technology, but by 1989, they came out with an all-new machine. They went to the upside-down forks that year, went to a case reed engine, which was fairly controversial, but all-new bodywork, which is just gorgeous. In my opinion, some of the best-looking bodywork of any machine ever. These 89/90 RMs are just gorgeous machines, even today, in my opinion. And the all-new RMX was based on that machine. The RM itself wasn't maybe the best machine available in the 250 division, but the RMX was very competitive. You had, obviously for enduro competition, absolute huge amounts of horsepower, not necessarily the hot setup. Yamaha's YZWR 250 would just blow these RMXs into the weeds, but the suspension was much more like motocross ready. It was more of a Western style bike. This was much more of an enduro machine. Now, these RMXs, one of the things about them was when they came to market, there was a bit of a push and pull between what the manufacturer was originally intending and then what the dealers wanted. The dealers wanted to make a machine that was very EPA legal, green sticker legal in California. So the bike came stock with throttle limiters, had limiters in the power valve system, had very choked off exhaust, made the bike very quiet. But the actual output was not much more than like a KDX 200. They were really slow. I know a good buddy of mine had one of these things in 90. I remember riding it and just being amazed that it felt so slow. It really... I thought it felt slow compared to my CR125. I was like, wow, this thing's a 250. It was, reasonably torquey, but if you didn't open it up, it was really mild. But if you swapped out a bunch of RM components, they became very potent wood weapons. I'm going to go year by year, talk a little bit about it as I've done in other videos, and just kind of talk a little bit about exactly what they tweaked each year over its run. It's a bike I've always wanted to have. I never had one. Like I said, I did have a friend who had one, and I got to ride it. And now I think more nostalgic. At the time, I was very unimpressed with it, but I'd love to have it now to play with and have as a trail bike. I think they're popular enduro machines even to this day for somebody to have something just to play around in the woods. In the late 80s and early 90s, Randy Hawkins won several national enduro titles on these machines. In 88, he won his first on a modified RM, which was basically the prototype for the original RMX. And for that era, Suzuki was a powerhouse. It's sad to see how they've kind of really pulled out of most everything now, but in the 90s, Suzuki was an off-road machine. They were really successful, and these RMXs were the tip of the spear, at least until about 96 or so, I think. When they finally redesigned the RMs in 96, I think they felt that the RMX was no longer competitive. Again, more puzzling that we never got an RMX version of this, and the race team switched over to riding modified RMs. But for at least the first 4, 5, 6 years of the life of the RMX, it was the bike that they ran. I'm sure they put a lot of RM spec stuff on it, but the bike was largely based on this off-road version. So if you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. I've done a retrospective on the history of the PE 175, which was the predecessor to the RMX. I've also done retrospectives of many other motocross machines, including several different generations of CRs, the 125, the 80, and what have you. Off-road machines like the XR250. I even have done a look back at the history of the Honda Odyssey. So if you like off-road stuff, make sure you check out my channel. There's probably something there of interest to find. If you'd like to support what I do, I have Motocross Vault merch available. I just came out with an all-new design with a CR125 in the back of a little Ford Ranger. I had somebody request a Ford Ranger, so I mocked this one up. I think it turned out pretty well. So if you have any other designs you'd like to see me do, let me know. Like I said, there's many different ones, ATVs, off-road bikes, motocross bikes available in my Teespring store. You can find a link to that in the description below and also put a card in the video. So here, without further ado, is the history of Suzuki's RMX250. All right, as we come to the first year of the RMX here in 1989, this is a all-new machine from the ground up. As I said in the intro, it is based on the all-new 1989 RM250, which was completely redesigned this year. It went from a standard cylinder reed to a case reed, which is a design that KTM has used, but typically is not found on most larger two-stroke machines. It tends to be hard hitting and high revving in terms of the way that power characteristics of those case reed engines typically go. They aren't known for having huge amounts of torque, and this 89 motor is very similar to that. It's basically a mid-range and up engine in the RM, and it's very similar in the RMX, but the RMX does have several things that are different about it. Obviously, it runs a little bit lower compression ratio. It has a different power valve on it with stops, basically preventing the power valves from opening all the way. There's also a stop built into the throttle, so the throttle will not open all the way as it comes from the factory, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. But all these things were done to meet sound standards. The exhaust is very choked off, very quiet. Like I said, it doesn't sound much more like, if you fire one of these things up, it sounds like a Yamaha Blaster or something. But interestingly, it seems to be even more choked off than Yamaha Blaster. It's really neutered the performance. So in stock condition, it wasn't much, much of a competition for anything in the class. Certainly nothing for a KTM Husqvarna, or certainly not Yamaha's YZ250WR, which was basically a motocross bike with wide ratio transmission. The RMX was designed to be, EPA legal and very choked off, but they were easily uncorked. So if you went and you took the RM stuff, a lot of guys put the RM head gasket on, swapped out the power valve stops and the throttle mechanism, it really perked the power up quite a bit. Now this chassis is all new this year, as I said. Very similar. I think it's actually almost identical to what's on the RM, other than some hard points to mount things like, bash bars and a kickstand and what have you. The machine itself is all new bodywork, beautiful design. I love the looks of this first RMX. It's a gorgeous machine. The tank is a little bit bigger on the RMX versus the RM, of course. But actually, most people at the time thought it had a very nice layout for an Enduro machine. Considering the tank's larger, it wasn't really considered obtrusive to ride on. Certainly way better than the stuff that Yamaha would stick on its WR250 a couple years later after this. This is the first year for upside down forks. The Suzuki RM went to an inverted fork this year, and the RMX got it as well. Now, from speaking to Charles Halcombe, who was one of the development riders on the RMX, when I was doing some research for this, he actually said they had originally wanted to spec the conventional forks on there, because conventional forks, while they may not be ideal for blitzing through supercross whoops, they are much more compliant on like rocks and roots, and there's the built-in flex that you don't want when you're hitting a really hard triple or a big whoop or something. That's not necessarily ideal on a supercross track, but off-road, that gives a little more comfort to the front end. And they actually originally had wanted to stick with this, but Suzuki's people inside thought it would make the bike look, kind of outdated at the time, with the upside down forks being a huge marketing push. They wanted to go with that, route. And the suspension on this actually was very good for what it was. It was a little bit soft, compared to a motocross machine. But I think, when these bikes came out in '89, they were really, really well reviewed. A lot of people loved the performance of everything but the motor. The motor was very soft and slow and required basically you had to ride it like a 125 if you didn't open it up, and it was really tough. Even if you did open it up, it still wasn't like a torque monster. Again, this motor, even in the RMs, wasn't the most powerful machine. It certainly didn't have anything to on like a Honda engine at the time. But if you did open it up, it was fine for the kind of enduro racing, off-road GNCC type stuff that it would have been designed for. So this first year, certainly an important machine, but it was a kind of a do-it-yourself kind of fixer-upper bike if you were planning to race it. For 1990, the RMX was back and is easily one of my favorite looking off-road machines of all time. The RMX is a beautiful machine. I actually prefer the 1990 graphics here a little bit. They're a little cleaner in my opinion. I love the RM logo. I thought it was a really handsome machine indeed. Now, interestingly, Suzuki, for a second-year machine, put a fair amount of updates for 1990 into the RMX. It's kind of surprising. When I'm looking at the brochure and reading up on the 90 model, it actually had quite a few updates. They added a new clutch cover, which added the ability to access and switch the plates without removing the whole side case. It's kind of surprising they didn't have this in '89. But in 1990, they finally got it. Honda had this feature since 1987, so they're a little bit behind the times here. But it definitely was a good idea if you were going to be hard on the clutch to be able to swap out the plates without pulling the water pump and everything else off, which was a major pain in the butt. They added a new clutch plate material for improved durability for 90. They added a new 2-stage power valve for smoother power delivery, although the power valve still had a little spacer in there that would prevent it from opening fully in stock condition. They added a new cylinder head shape for smoother power delivery. They improved the inner and outer fork tubes and valving for improved front fork damping characteristics, according to the brochure. They also changed the damping in the rear shock and added a larger shock shaft for improved durability and fade resistance. They redesigned the rear brake caliper body for increased durability. This is one of the issues they'd had in '89. The brakes, while they worked fairly well, tended to overheat and were a little bit overtaxed. So they redesigned that a little bit for 1990 to get hopefully a little better braking performance and a little less fade from the rear. They also repositioned the water pump to provide additional clearance for the rider's boots. Other than that, the 1990 is almost exactly the same machine. That means, again, the 249cc engine is very choked off in stock form. If you wanted to go ahead and open it up, what you would want to do is remove the airbox cover. You should install the carburetor top out of an RM250, which would allow the throttle to open fully. Go up to a larger main jet. Obviously, once you open it up, you're going to need to do that. Most people would also recommend installing the RM250 head gasket, which gave a little bit higher compression to the engine, and then remove that little spacer from the power valve to allow it to open up all the way. And of course, you'd want to ditch the stock silencer and exhaust, which was very quiet but extremely choked off. Once you did that, the bike was, again, no stump pulling powerhouse. The power band was still a mostly mid-range focus, much like the RM was as well. But it was much more competitive, certainly snappier, and plenty fast enough for most off-road use. For 1991, the RMX was back with a fairly significant update in appearance, certainly. This is the year that Suzuki really went a little crazy on the RM line, and I will say that the RMX is much more subtle. It doesn't get the white bodywork, so it doesn't have the white shrouds that were such a glaring change to me. That also, if you notice, the frame remains blue, so it's actually very similar, I guess, to 1990, certainly more than the RMs, which they changed the frame color, they went to that kind of a strange seat. The seat is still using that kind of a weird splotch pattern. I'm not sure what the heck they were thinking when they came up with that one, but I would say of the two, the RMX is much more attractive in my eyes. I was never a big fan of the 91 and 92 RMs. So the RMX was a little more subtle and, in my opinion, at least more attractive. Now, in addition to the new graphics, you have several updates as well. Again, it's kind of surprising how much, at least early on, they're putting into refinement every year on this machine, considering it's only a 2-year-old bike at this point. But for 1991, you get an all-new fork. Now, some of that is due to the fact that it shares most of the components with the RMs. So when the RMs got new suspension, the RMX would get a version of it usually as well. And for 1991, you go from a 41 millimeter to a 45 millimeter fork in the front. There's also a new shock in the back with 48% larger reservoir for obviously more fade resistance. They updated the frame geometry slightly. Also came up with an all-new swing arm that was stronger this year and a little different design than the year before. They made some minor adjustments to the linkage as well. They added new cylinder porting to, again, try and improve throttle response. With the stock stuff installed, the bike didn't have a lot of snap. So improving throttle response was of utmost importance if you're going to leave it without opening it up. Now, their foot pegs are slightly larger for 1991. They also added a new voltage regulator, and it had a new radiator design, which supposedly was to deliver improved cooling for 1991. Now, one nice thing they did in this year is they added the availability of the competition kit free of charge. So when you bought your new RM for $4,099 in 1991, you got a several $100 competition kit free of charge, and that included a RM pipe, RM silencer, and a set of jets to, once you open it up, of course, you got to rejet, and a different throttle top for the carburetor that would allow it to open all the way. It still had to deal with some other stuff internally as far as like the power valve, I believe, and what have you. But if you just swap this stuff over, it really made the machine much more peppy. And it was nice that Suzuki, realizing that the bike was in very, very detuned condition in stock form, included this competition kit in 91 at no additional charge. For 1992, the RMX250 was back with another year of refinements. The graphics are largely the same as they were the year before. The main difference you'll notice is the graphics on the side plates, which probably if you were racing you would have taken off anyway, but that changes a little bit. The RMX logo is slightly different as well. The machine, again, is, in my taste at least, much more understated and better looking than the RMs. They certainly did not go the crazy kaleidoscope look of the stock 92 RMs on the RMX. So for me, at least, I thought it was a better looking machine. The plastic and stuff stays the same, but they did make some suspension improvements for 1992. Some testers had complained that the RMX was a little twitchy at speed. These RMs were all known for being very close, sharp turners, but kind of busy at speed. And the RMX, using largely the same chassis as the RM, was very similar. So for 1992, they slowed the steering slightly by altering the steering angle and making it a little less aggressive to hopefully improve stability. The RMX still remained a very excellent turner. Now, they also updated the suspension action slightly for 1992. Some people had problems with forks blowing seals on the 91 RMs and RMXs. So the new Shawa forks got a new redesigned upper leg and lower fork steel collar to hopefully improve durability. The lower legs were also strengthened and got new plastic guards. The damping both in the shock and the forks was modified also to hopefully improve the ride. They also installed a new lower shock bearing, which was larger for increased durability. The motor itself was largely unchanged aside from one more friction plate in the clutch and one more metal plate. That was to improve durability as well. Other than that, the engine is identical to 1991. For 1992, you also still got the competition kit free of charge, so you could upgrade your performance if you actually wanted to outrun a KDX 200 and swap out some of the RM components for 1992. Other than those minor changes, the RMX is largely the same machine it had been the year before. For 1993, there's some fairly big changes in the world of the RMX, although most of them take place outside of the United States. International markets get a all-new machine based on the redesigned 1993 RMs. You can see the styling here is very similar to the RMs. I always thought this was a really cool-looking machine at the time, and I was really shocked that U.S. market bikes didn't get it. I know when Dirt Rider spoke to Suzuki, they said they wanted to quote-unquote be true to the integrity of the RMX. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but it meant we did not get the new frame, the new bodywork, all the major updates. While the 1993 US version did not get the new bodywork and frame and what have you, there were some significant improvements and changes for 93. First up, you can tell the styling. I really love this look of the 93. Went back to the all-yellow look of the 1989 and 90 machines. The yellow seat and what have you. A really good looking machine. Never really loved the stock graphics this year, but they're not bad. It's overall, I'd say it's a much better look than the kind of busy 91, 92 look, at least for me. The bike itself is frame-wise largely unchanged, but they did make some significant engine changes for 93. As I said earlier, RMXs suffered from a really choked off exhaust, really choked off intake and what have you. And for 93, Suzuki opened the bike up significantly. There is an all-new cylinder with revised power valve system. They massaged the crankcase and the reed valve. They installed an all-new 38mm Keihin carburetor, getting rid of the Mikuni, which had been fairly difficult to jet, and a lot of people had not been a big fan of it. They also changed the damping slightly for 1993, and basically did away with most of the need for the power-up kit. The new bike was much more opened up stock. The new exhaust, while still quiet, was less restrictive. For maximum power, you still would have wanted to go with an RM or at least an aftermarket exhaust and silencer. But other than that, you didn't need to take all the throttle stop off and all those other things. The bike ran much better in stock condition, had better low-end torque. I mean, none of these case reed RMs or RMXs were stump pullers by any means, but this 93 motor apparently was much snappier, much more competitive in stock trim, and even if you open it up, it ran better. The earlier bikes, like I said, you had to kind of run them like a 125, kind of scream them everywhere and use a lot of RPMs, but this 93 motor ran better stock and had a little more torque, and I think by most people's estimation at the time, the suspension and the motor was much better, and this was by far probably the best stock RMX to this point. So bike looks better, runs better, performs better for 93. Pretty significant year. While we didn't get all the updates that the other markets got, we did get some significant improvements in 93. For 1994, the RMX is back with only graphical updates. You can see they took the graphics off of the side plates, that kind of splat design that was on the RMs in 93 and the RMX. I'm not sure what that was all about. Suzuki loved to put graphics on their side plates in this era. But for 94, they ditched that, and they changed the shroud graphics ever so slightly. Other than that, it's exactly the same machine as it was the year before. I will say I do prefer the yellow front headlight to the white one, but very subtle changes, nothing significant for 1994. 1995 brings with it another very minor graphical update on the RMX. Plastic, everything else stays exactly the same, but they do get the new, I guess, more white graphics, similar to what was used in the RMs in 1995. I remember back when this bike was new, I didn't really care for these graphics. I never thought they were particularly handsome, but obviously the overall machine is getting a little dated at this point. In 89, this bodywork looked really fresh and new, but by 1995, it was starting to look pretty dated. And there were a lot of rumors that there would be an all-new RMX on the horizon for 1996 or 1997. Unfortunately, that would not come to pass. This 95 bike is exactly the same as 94. And I think the fact that we did not get that redesign in 93 was kind of showing you that at least US Suzuki was content to kind of sit back a little bit with the RMX and let it just fill in their lineup without any major updates. In 1996, Suzuki once again completely redesigned their RM lineup. There was an all-new RM250 and RM125. I actually had both of them in 96. Love them. Great little machines, although I know a lot of people kind of poo-poo them. I quite like this redesign. Love the looks of them, in fact. And other markets other than the US actually got an all-new RMX250 as well. And you can see it's very closely resembles the styling on the RMs. Good-looking motorcycle, in my opinion. Interestingly, though, we didn't get it here in the US. So I think that's pretty indicative of the fact that Suzuki, as I said earlier, was kind of not interested in giving us all the latest stuff in the off-road market. Again, I'm not sure why. I would love to know the reasoning there, but perhaps the RMX just wasn't a big enough seller. I'm not sure. But in any case, I'm sure if they had introduced this more up-to-date design, it probably would have sold better. I know my RM this year had really good low-end and mid-range snap. Certainly a much torquier engine than the old Case Reed design, so it actually probably would have been a better motor off-road than the RMX they were using. But in any case, we didn't get it. For 1996, though, we did get a couple of significant upgrades. This is the first year that they went back to a conventional fork. I love these forks on my RMs. They were awesome. They worked fantastic. And while I never got to ride an RMX with them, I imagine they were probably a little better off-road as well. One of the things about this design is there's less underhang. That was one of the main issues with the old conventional design. There was a lot of fork protruding below the axle, meaning that off-road particularly you get it caught in ruts and roots and what have you. So this new design had a much less underhang. It was larger diameter overall, so it had less flex. I love these forks. I think most of the magazine stuff, they worked really well in the RMX as well. So this is the first year they went back to the conventional forks. They also redesigned the intake track slightly, once again for better throttle response. They're always chasing that throttle response on this motor. And they went to a 2-ring piston for improved compression and durability. Other than that, the 96 is very similar to 95. They did change the styling a little bit. You can see the 96, even though it didn't get the new bodywork, it did go to the new graphics and the kind of purpley shrouds. I'm not so sure how well it works on the RMX. I thought it worked great on the RMs. This old bodywork with this new graphics kind of like smacks a little bit of lipstick on a pig to me. But in general, good looking motorcycle overall still, I'd say. For 1997 and 1998, the RMX was back with only graphical updates. As I said earlier, they had added the conventional fork to the 96 RMX, although I should mention that it's not the exact same design that was used on the RM. The RM had a twin chamber design, and this is a little simpler single chamber cartridge design, but it still worked very well. Most of the magazines thought it was an excellent fork for enduro use. This 97, the graphics slightly different. They changed kind of the color. A lot of people confuse the 96 and 97 because actually the bikes look very similar, the RMs as well. They only subtly changed the color, added a little more yellow to the graphics, but other than that, it looks almost identical. And for 98, they completely changed the looks of the RMs. I was never a big fan of the 98 RMs in terms of the way they look. and I really don't like the RMX. All this black is just not my cup of tea, but again, that's a personal choice, and aesthetically, that stuff's easy to switch out. So mechanically, though, this 97 and 98 are identical to the years before. Unfortunately, 96 was really the last year it was going to get any significant upgrades. And as I said, they never did get the complete redesign that we got in other markets for some reason. So Suzuki basically said they'd had enough of developing the RMX and put it out to pasture here at the end of the 1998 season. So there you have it. That's a look back at the history of the RMX250, a machine that I was always kind of puzzled that Suzuki didn't put more investment into. Like I said, they had this complete redesign, all new machine in '89, and really they just, here in the U.S. at least, they didn't spend any more money on really doing anything other than just minor tweaks. Eventually in the 2000s, late 2000s, they come out with an RMX 450. But as I said, Suzuki, they kind of just don't have their heart in it anymore. I think if they came out with a two-stroke, even if they took the old 2007 RM 250 and came out with something similar to what Yamaha's doing with the YZ 250X, I'm sure the thing would sell like hotcakes today. I'm just surprised. It's like Suzuki, maybe they just don't care at this point. I'm not sure what they're doing over there. But in any case, a cool machine, a machine I think a lot of people think fondly of. Certainly not perfect in stock condition. It was no powerhouse. It was way underpowered and very choked off. But looking for a quiet machine that with some easy mods could turn into a fire breather. RMX was a good choice. And like I said, for many years, it was very competitive. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, leave me a comment, like, share it on social media. I very much appreciate that as well. If you have any other machines you'd like to see me do retrospective of, leave a comment in the section below, and I'm happy to try and get to it if I have the information to make it happen. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazier from the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.